Hi, I'm Casey Patterson,
Hi, I'm Felicia Jones.
and this is Thriving While Black,
The
podcast. Our guest today is Khalid Alexander. He's the founder and president of Pillars of the Community, a member of the California Black Power Network. He's a professor at San Diego City College, where he teaches English, specifically literature and composition. And he served on the Black Equity Collective community review body, specifically for our Catalyze grant. And most importantly, he reps my hometown in Southeast San Diego. Felicia, how do you know Khalid?
So I know him sort of in passing because we served together with California Cause and the Black Census and Redistricting Hub and did civic engagement work, but never really got a chance to know him personally. I will say that when he was in the space, he was incredibly profound, but also super funny and would always say something to lighten up the room or lighten up the mood at any time. And so I loved being in space with him, but I love even more that we get a chance to get to know him more today. So I'm glad that he's here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were planning this show, organizing While Black. He was one of the first people I thought of because, like you, I never really knew Khalid, but I was always like in these spaces with him where I thought, dang, that's a deep brother, Like I like the way he sort of approached the work. First of all, I like that he repped my hometown.
Of course.
So that was always a connection, that we had. I mean, literally his organization sits in the heart of where I grew up, where my brother lived before he passed away, where my sister-in-law still lives. So just in the heart of where I feel home, So it always meant a lot to me, just sort of getting to know him and his organization. So when I was hired by the Black Census and Redistricting Hub to help launch the hub, Pillars of the Community, Khalid's organization, was part of its predecessor effort, the African American Civic Engagement Project, which, COPE was part of as well. And so not every organization that was part of AECEP came over into the hub, but his organization did. So it gave me a chance to get to know him a little bit more. And I always remember the co-executive directors of what is now the Black Power Network, because the hub then became the California Black Power Network, would always talk about him and be like, yeah, he's a dope brother. He's got a lot of really good insight. I love that he's a husband, he's a father, he does faith-based organizing. He organizes in a part of San Diego. People don't realize how many immigrants are actually in San Diego that are non-Mexican, that are non-Hispanic. And so there's such a richness, to his story that I've always really enjoyed learning about. And so I'm really, really excited that he agreed to be our guest talking about organizing while Black. Khalid Alexander. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Glad to have you here.
Good to have you here.
Absolutely.
Thanks for making the drive up to LA.
You're welcome.
That is a haul. It is not an easy. It is not an easy ask.
Yeah, we appreciate you so much, and we want to jump right in, if you don't mind, and get to know you more. So we ask all of our guests to tell us a little bit about your childhood and growing up, and what are some of those special memories that really have shaped who you are. And who you've become through this work.
Yeah, so, I'm one of the few people who were born and raised in San Diego, raised by my mother, single parent, most of the time. And the things, as I was reflecting kind of on the questions and some of the things I wanted to talk about today, one of the things that came up is just the presence of stories in my life, and stories of my family, who they are. And I think those things have really shaped who I am and what I think is important, because it's very difficult to know where we're going if you don't know where you came from. My great-grandfather, my mother's grandfather, was actually a runaway slave.
Oh, interesting.
And so when he ran away, he ended up running away from slavery and raised his family on an Indian reservation in Nebraska, in Omaha, Nebraska.
Really?
My grandfather, his son, left the reservation at a really young age and ended up doing field work, where continued working, eventually became a union organizer and a Communist Party leader. My mother, his daughter, was a member of the Black Panther Party in the Oakland chapter. And one of the things that kind of unites all of those people in the work that I do today, and I think the reason why I focus on people who have been negatively impacted by the criminal justice system, is because all from my great-grandfather to my grandfather to my mother, all of these people were criminalized because of who they were.
Wow, wow.
So that insight has enabled me to be able to look at crime, to look at how we treat quote unquote criminals, how the criminal justice system or the punished bureaucracy targets people, often for who they are, where they come from, how they look, what their culture is. And so those stories growing up about how they dealt with the circumstances, how my great-grandfather felt it necessary to become a criminal just to live as a human being. How my grandfather saw communism and labor organizing as a vehicle for racial and social equality for all people. How my mom's involvement in the Panthers and all of the different circumstances surrounding these things have definitely led to who I am. The other piece, I think, of my childhood that stands up in relationship to the work is I think at a very young age, remember being pulled over by the police with my friends, asked kind of, who we were, where we were from, what gang we were from, all of these different types of questions where at the time I thought was normal. I'm wearing Dickies, I'm wearing, Chuck Taylors, I'm wearing Nike Cortez, different types of shoes. And so I thought that those things were all normal. And it wasn't until later on in my organizing work that I was able to make some of the connections between those stops at a young age and some of the work that we do now around gang documentation, around mass incarceration and other issues.
Well, on the subject of stories, tell us a little bit about what was happening in San Diego. What was either happening personally that caused you to establish Pillars of the Community in San Diego?
Yeah, so it wasn't an obvious choice to go into activism or any of these things, even with my family background. I barely graduated high school. I became Muslim in 1995, my last year of high school, and ended up doing a lot of traveling. Came back after traveling, no particular interest in school, but decided being poor sucked. And so somebody told me, you should become a respiratory therapist because they make a lot of money. I sat in my first advanced math class, which I think was probably pre-algebra. But for me, it was advanced, and I didn't understand anything that person was saying. I sat in my chemistry class, didn't understand anything. But in my English class, I noticed that all of a sudden, not only did I have something to say relating to the material that we were reading, but people were actually listening. And so I didn't stop talking since. No. So partially true. Ended up transferring to San Diego State, where I got my degree in comparative literature. Had the opportunity to study overseas in Syria, where I was on a Fulbright scholarship.
Oh, wow.
And then when I came back, I was trying to decide, do I want to continue kind of in academia, apply for a PhD, or do I want to focus on community? So at the same time, I began teaching at San Diego City College as a part-time instructor. And I noticed that the issues that I cared about were actually represented by the students who were in my class.
Yeah.
There's three major things that ended up leading to the creation of Pillars. One was kind of a spiritual question of what does it mean to be Muslim in the United States. So after studying the Crusades in Syria and just this, and being an American living in another country, this is during the Iraq War, so around 2004, 5, and 6. And then coming back, what is my role or responsibility as a Muslim living in the United States? The second thing is I had a student who was getting all A's, formerly incarcerated, one of the standout students in the class. His conversations were always good. He was always helping other people. And 2 weeks before the end of the semester, he ended up being rearrested. And I found out later that the reason why he was rearrested is because he had a parole violation, that his parole officer had came by the house and found the blue shirt on the bottom of his closet. And because he was a documented gang member, used that blue shirt as a reason
violation.
as a violation to lock him back up, which ended up, of course, ruining his semester and other things. So I recognized that there's a lot of obstacles outside of the classroom that were getting in the way of my students' ability to be successful inside the classroom. Around the same time, before moving to Syria, I had lived in East San Diego, but then coming back, I moved to Southeast San Diego. And they have very kind of different populations, but similar struggles that they're going through in those two communities, East San Diego and Southeast San Diego. And I was pulled over 3 times in a period of 2 weeks. And what stood out about those pullovers is that it wasn't because I was suspected of a crime or anything, but the 2 questions that they asked me I hadn't heard before, partially because I was under 18. But the first one is, are you a fourth waiver? And the second one is, are you a documented gang member? So a lot of people don't know that. What is a fourth waiver?
Yeah,
what is that?
Yeah.
So a fourth waiver is essentially one of the requisites for a lot of people being released from prison is to waive their Fourth Amendment rights. So they no longer have the same rights as you and I may have.
Which is around search and seizure.
Which is around search, seizure, and privacy. And so the other question was, what gang are you from, or are you a gang member, or are you a documented gang member? And at first, I thought that those questions were to understand who I was and whether or not I posed a threat. But over the last few years, working in this population, working in Southeast San Diego, what we've realized is these questions are really meant to figure out how many of your rights they can get away with violating.
Wow.
How much of your quote-unquote rights as a citizen, arguably as a human being, can they ignore? The fourth waiver, I think, is obvious. What's less obvious is as soon as you have that tag of documented gang member, not only can you be searched, not only can all of these other things happen that come along with the fourth waiver, but you can be shot and nobody will care.
Wow.
So all the time we see in the papers, gang member shot, this, that. We don't hear anything about the crime. We don't think anything because there's an assumption that if you're a gang member, you must be guilty. The third thing that happened is before, when I was in graduate school, I was a volunteer imam in the local jail. And a lot of the brothers who I had worked with were now, this is maybe 7 years later, were getting out and realizing that they don't have jobs, they don't have a place to live, they don't have anything. So Pillars actually started as a service provider, or the understanding, hey, let's do job training, let's do resume building, let's help them get into houses, but quickly realize that no matter how many services you give to people, if you're not addressing the underlying circumstances that led to incarceration in the first place, that you're actually wasting time. So it's like filling a bucket with water that has holes in the bottom. No matter how much water you put in it, if you're not addressing it. And so I moved fairly quickly from I used to consider myself, kind of like a Malcolm X figure, and I would have a speech ready anytime somebody asked me to sign a petition or to register. I don't believe in the American system of democracy, and this poor guy is just getting minimum wage or getting
right.
He's like, are you going to sign it or not?
I was ready for him, anytime. But all of a sudden, I realized as I began to look into racial profiling, as I began to look at what these people were, what my friends and what my brothers and sisters were being locked up for, I began to realize that there's a lot of structural issues. And that unless we're addressing those structural issues, again, we're not addressing the actual problem in the first place. And I don't think it's possible to address structural issues without civic engagement, traditional civic engagement. And so that's when we began to look at laws, that's when we began to look at policies and elected officials and seeing when and how they can impact the lives and the communities that we love.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I mean, similarly, I've shared this with you that I see a lot of similarities between the work of Pillars and the work of COPE out in the IE from the perspective that, COPE in similar fashions started really providing services to returning citizens and like hearing the concerns around public health and things of that nature, which then, prompted broader sort of engagement in organizing and civic engagement and things of that nature. So this idea that you all really sort of began organizing really as a way to meet needs of folks who were coming home, who didn't actually have a safety net, who had quote unquote served their time, but didn't actually have anywhere that was going to hold them up, to keep them from being continually entrapped,
That's right.
in
That's
the
right.
system.
That's right.
And, certainly having grown up in San Diego, my older brother was, caught up in very similar struggles and similar conditions. I mean, I do have memories. He was 10 years older than me. So I do have memories of when he was 17, like the police shining lights outside of our house looking for him, because he just came home from a party or whatever, So that sort of targeting just for who you are is something that, I have memories of as a child, for sure.
And
Yeah.
if I go back to the original question and connect it, I had actually forgotten. So being asked, am I a gang member, and those things seemed new to me because I'd really been living a completely different life.
Right.
And honestly, it wasn't until maybe 3 years ago, 2020, when COVID had hit and I was sitting kind of reflecting, and I realized, oh, they were actually asking me that question when I was 12. They were asking me that question when I was 13 and when I was 14. And what I didn't know at 12, 13, and 14, when I thought this was normal interactions where they were coming and, hey, we're going to take your picture. No, we're not arresting you. We just want to take your picture. And can I brush my hair? And it's like a fun thing, like, what gang are you from? And I wasn't any more or less a gang member than some of my other friends, but now you've got cameras and, I'm from such and such, and I'm, whoop-de-woo, and saying all of these different types of things. And so it wasn't until fast forward to 2014 that I realized, or 2020, when I recognized that this had happened to me, is that they were actually creating a database.
That's
they were
right.
creating a gang
Yes.
database throughout California where they were putting kids.
That's right. That's right.
And putting them on a list of people that, again, essentially would make them secondary citizens, people who don't have the same rights as other people. And often you wouldn't find out until you were actually in court being charged with something. And instead of being charged with a misdemeanor, now all of a sudden you're being hit with gang enhancements.
With
and all of
enhancements
these
and-
other things. And so doing the civic engagement work has really made it, it's enabled me to see how there's so much work that's happening behind the scenes that we don't know about. There's so many laws that are being passed that we've never heard of.
Absolutely.
And that unless we're at least aware, then we're always going to be victimized by those laws. It might not always. I'm not like one of the people who are like, you have to vote or you can't complain or people have died to fight for you. No, that's not my point. At Pillars, what we tell people is we're not telling you to play the game. We're telling you don't get played. And
By
if you
the
don't
game.
know
Yeah.
what's actually happening,
Right.
again, you're always going to be losing.
Tell us a little bit about your organizing model and what influences your model. What are the communities that you're organizing? Just interested in getting underneath your model a little bit.
Yeah, so I would say my organizing model is, in my mind, almost an anti-organizing model.
Okay, tell us about that.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
get that.
Which sounds bad. My introduction to organizing came up across in sessions where they're talking about organizing and approaching how do you organize a community, and it always came off feeling a little bit fake. And so it was this idea of go into a community, sit down with them, invite them for tea and coffee, ask them about their injuries or things that had hurt them when they were growing up, build that relationship, and then get them to support whatever thing that's happening. Or you never have friends for always or enemies for always. Everything is this political thing. And there was something that never quite sat right with me about that. And I think part of it is a lot of people's approach to organizing is a very kind of outside and manipulative approach to organizing, which in many parts is driven by the nonprofit industrial complex.
Of course.
Yeah, of course.
You have
Yes,
funders who say,
absolutely.
hey, these are our priorities, we're going to give you a grant. And so now you have to find organizers, often outside of the community, who are going to go into the community, take pictures, do all of these other types of things. And so even though, I try to avoid the word organizing, and I look at what we do really as community building.
Okay, good.
Which
Yeah.
is semantics, because somebody who's doing real, intentional, heartfelt organizing is automatically going to be doing community building as well.
Yeah.
But most of the community building that we do is in Southeast San Diego, and we kind of look at Pillars as two parts. One is focusing on community building / organizing, and the other piece is kind of policy work that we do both locally and throughout the state. But the people who we work with are the people who are most negatively impacted by law enforcement and incarceration. And as we've already alluded to, the people who float to the top in that are people who are part of gangs, who have been documented as gang members, or who have been accused of being gang members.
Wow.
Tell us about the role of faith in your community building model.
So I think everything that I do at its heart is based on faith, and a fear that what am I going to say when I stand before Allah, when I stand before God on the day of judgment. You saw this happening. You saw mass incarceration. You knew what the conditions were like for people who were incarcerated. You see the way that police are treating kids on the street. You see all of these things. What did you do? And so the heart of all of our work at Pillars, and so even though we're a religious nonprofit, I think most people who come around wouldn't necessarily see that direct connection because we are in the community. But that's because we feel that we have a responsibility that what did we do to make the communities that we're a part of, that we came for, better for everybody. And so everything that I do, I think, happens out of that lens. That this isn't a question of should we be doing it, should we not be doing it, is it a job, is it this, is it, we have to do it. We don't have an option to sit by and watch our brothers and sisters and relatives and community members be treated as subhumans.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, I mean, I think we would definitely agree with that. You know, though our
Absolutely.
faith tradition is Christianity, you know, I think we would agree that the role of justice and the question of, you know, how did you help the least among you,
Right.
you know, and what did you do to actually bring justice into the earth, you know, is a question that we all, I think, take very seriously. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Casey referenced the fact that San Diego is home to, a diverse immigrant population. And it is also a state, an area that is very similar to the Inland Empire where it doesn't get a lot of philanthropic investment. And it is also very conservative. So how are you really navigating the complexities of community building in this landscape? How are you preparing your leaders and yourself to wage really important battles now and in the future in the face of those complexities in San Diego?
I think the most important thing that we're dealing, not just to build leaders and other people, but for myself, is political education.
Yeah.
If we don't understand where we're coming from, you're not going to know where you're going. And that's true on a personal level, but it's also true on a political level as well. It's true as far as Black people in this country. If we don't know the struggles and if we haven't studied where we won and where we lost, what can be done better, what we're doing worse, then it's going to be very easy to get tricked into a system that's really anti-liberation. We're living in an anti-liberation system surrounded by anti-liberation structures. And so it's so easy to get caught up into focusing our pain and our energy against other people who are also suffering through their own pain. And so when it comes to immigrant communities, when it comes to refugees, it's very easy for us to fall into, they're Black, but their great-grandfather wasn't a slave, right? That we're not the same. And I think I saw a post on social media, not a huge fan of social media on it too much, but that said something close to our struggles are unique, but our liberation is entwined.
I love that.
And if we begin to understand, well, what is the story? What is the history between their journey that are now, if they're from Somalia, now living in Southeast San Diego. What is the story and what is the history between the journey of they're from El Salvador and now living in Southeast San Diego or in South Los Angeles? And the more you understand those journeys, the more you're able to say, hey, you know what? Not even figuratively, literally, it's basically all coming from stuff that the United States has done, both locally and abroad. And when you begin to see that, you can recognize, yeah, we're not the same. Who would want to be the same, right? I'm proud of being a Black American who's descendant of slaves. And there's a difference between me and somebody else, but that shouldn't prevent me from recognizing our shared struggles. And so again, understanding the backgrounds, understanding the histories, reading books, and then again, a lot of the things that we're learning today are nothing new. We're reading right now Black Awakening in Capitalist America. I think it's Richard Allen. And I'm reading this stuff and I'm like, man, this is exactly what just happened with the mayor of San Diego. This is exactly what just happened with labor and organizing and all of in ways that we undermined one another. And so if we are all more aware of these types of things, I really feel like that's the definitive armor that we need going into what I think is a very, very frightful future. I don't feel like we're actually heading into an optimistic space. I think before we get to the optimistic space, it's going to be a lot worse. And unless we're aware of those lessons that history have taught us and that our elders and people at the forefront of struggle have told us and wrote about, that we're going to have a lot more learning than necessary.
Is that what you mean by political education? Is some of teaching some of that history, some of those lessons, helping to learn, unlearn, so on and so forth?
Yeah, but so when I think about political education, it's usually it has to do with history, but it's also being able to approach things with an open mind and not in a kind of a simplistic, ideological way of understanding things. So sometimes you'll see political education as a means of, hey, these are our talking points. This is what we believe. I'm an abolitionist and X, Y, and Z. Or
almost
I'm
as a
about
means of
reform.
indoctrination.
It becomes a means of indoctrination. Our only ideology that we teach in our political education is shit is complex. And we want people to understand the complexity of all these situations. And then with that complexity, realize that there is actually a path forward in order to fight for liberation. Pillar's central fight, at the heart of our fight, is for Black liberation. But we recognize that that's, one, even if we wanted it to be possible, it's not in this country for us to become liberated on our own. There's too many structures for us to all of a sudden, and we don't have the numbers and the resources. We have to be focused on the Black struggle, period, but we also have to be paying attention to who are our allies in this fight. Again, our struggles may be different, but our liberation is entwined.
How are you keeping the community that you're doing community building with, engaged, even when the fights seem long haul, when there isn't optimism or it doesn't feel like there's optimism? Like, what are you doing to keep a community energized?
Well, that's where community building comes in. And so what is community building? It might just be having some food. It might be having a barbecue, bringing people together and talking and just building those relationships with one another, I think is absolutely necessary. But to your point, it's not easy because so much of what we look at as struggle and organizing or community building is actually just survival. So much of the policy we work isn't liberatory policy.
It's not,
It's survival policy. It's, hey, if we don't do this, we're going to be in even worse situation. But again, I think political education, reading history, understanding one another's struggles, even if they were born in a different country, understanding those things, even though it feels like you're focused on the negative, is actually inspiring because you realize you're not alone. You realize this isn't the first time. You realize that you're a part of a larger historical process that has happened all over the world, and it becomes less a sense of what do we have or where are we at, and more of a question of where are we going.
So you're saying something that's speaking to me around this idea of intertwined narrative, okay? And I know that there are some members of Pillars who are now published authors, right? And have told and written their own narrative. So tell us about that. How did that experience come to be, and what sort of liberation did that imbue, in them?
Well, first as a literature major, right, reading literature and recognizing that one of the easiest ways to be able to understand somebody else's shoes and where they're coming from is actually through reading about those stories. I think slave narratives, the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass and others, are arguably the first American literature. And that when we read those literatures, you understand America a lot better than you do if you're reading Emerson or somebody else. And realize that I'm working with these people who look at, oftentimes they don't see themselves as extraordinary, they don't see themselves as special or everything, but when you listen to their stories and the things that have led to who they are or the choices that have made, you realize, we're surrounded by really beautiful, amazing, thriving, strong human beings who might look like they have nothing in common. But when you sit there and you start listening to one another's stories, then you begin to see, oh, wow, like this person is amazing. And so part of it was, pillars of the community are those people who have been overlooked, right? We're not looking for the leaders of the community. We're looking for the pillars of the community.
Yeah, I love that.
And so often the people who have experienced the most pain, who have been the most dismissed, who've been the most looked, are actually the strongest. They're the ones who have weathered those storms. Right. And so the purpose of so we brought a group of people together and we said, hey, tell us a chapter out of your life. Tell us a story out of the chapter of your life. That was pretty much all the prompt contained. Not, talk about pain, talk about this. And surprisingly, almost all of them went to these very painful stories of incarceration, of prostitution, of abuse, of all of these different types of what we would look at as horrible stories from the outside. But what was amazing about it is those stories became inspirational for everybody else that was there.
They did.
And then, so the idea was just get people together, have them tell those stories. We'll work with them, write it out, and they can read it to friends, loved ones, and community members. And then we were approached by a local press, city press, and said, hey, we would love to publish these. And so then we went into an editing phase and ended up publishing them. We're on our 3rd volume now.
That's dope.
Wow.
And so,
is it an anthology, or is it, are they
it's
individual
a collection.
stories?
It's a collection of individual stories.
Okay.
I love that.
And and so both being able to hear it is empowering for us, but also for them to be able to see themselves reflected in the pages of their stories and in the pages of other people's stories is also a really kind of powerful experience for themselves.
Speaking of seeing yourselves reflected, I'm curious how you see the work of Pillars within the broader landscape of organizing / community building in California. How do you see your work sort of reflected in that broader landscape?
When we first started doing the work, a lot of people, as you're aware of with COPE, a lot of the people who were addressing the pain and suffering in the neighborhoods were doing that through service providing.
That's right, yeah.
And there wasn't a lot of work going under addressing the structural issues that have led to them in the first place. And then those organizations who are doing very important work, regardless, that were addressing structural things, or even the ones that were doing service providing, often had a relationship with law enforcement that was a little bit too comfortable for myself personally, but more important for the people that we were working with. And Pillars of the Community really is one of the few organizations, I think, in California that is, it's not a stretch to say anti-police, that we really look at police and law enforcement as the cause of crime. We look at them as the cause for all of the societal issues that we're dealing with. Because of that, we ended up saying, hey, you know what? our focus is going to be advocating for the people who have been harmed by law enforcement, as opposed to all of the other, again, important work. There's organizations and friends that I know who work closely with the police, and if I need somebody to talk to the police, I'm going to hit
That's
them
who you
up
call
too.
up. Yeah.
And so I think that's another thing that's unique about us, is even though we have a very kind of confrontational relationship with the police, we don't necessarily diss people or look down on other organizations that do. The issue is there was a lane, nobody's in this lane, and we think it's a very important lane for us to be able to address.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
So what are we not paying attention to right now that in 5 years we will wish we had?
A lot. I'll tell you 5 years from now. So one is community building, period. So right now, especially if we're talking about philanthropy and nonprofit organizations, and again, it's part of this system that makes it very difficult to focus on anything other than deliverables and objectives.
Right.
And right now, there's not a lot of grants that are out there saying, hey, we want to give you money to build community.
Right.
There's civic engagement grants. There might be addressing this need and that need. And what I've realized from traveling across the world is that when we talk about who are the people who are thriving, who are the people who really are doing well in life, in the United States, we often associate that with material goods and material needs. How much money am I making? Am I dealing with poverty? Am I able to pay the bills? And what I noticed overseas, whether it was in Africa and India and in other places, is you have very poor communities, but they have community. They might not be able to afford childcare, but their cousin or their neighbor or their brother or other things. And despite that poverty, they're living very kind of happy lives. That's not to glamorize poverty.
That's right.
They have issues. And I think our biggest thing that we have been neglecting and haven't necessarily identified that we're missing, because I think we all feel it missing, is community. We don't know the name of our neighbors.
Yeah, we talked about that the other day. Yeah, we did.
If I need help, how long I'm going to call somebody? How long is it going to take for them to come? Are they going to answer the phone? Is it going to be on vibrate? All of those things. So not really having communities that can protect one another, I think, is one issue. The other big issue, I think, is technology. I don't think that we're looking into, you have some organizations that, thank goodness, are doing a lot of work, but I don't think it has spread to the extent that it really needs to. Michelle Alexander talks about the cyclical nature of racism, the cyclical nature of oppression. And I think the next battle that we're going to be on is going to be a battle of technology. So while we're addressing the war on drugs, while we're addressing gang documentations, while we're addressing all of these different policies, the police are beginning to stockpile all of these technologies that are used not only in the United States, but are used in wars in other countries and whatnot. And those technologies are going to be used against us. If you look at technologies like ShotSpotter, like smart streetlights, like all of these things, they're actually the antithesis or the opposite of community. So they've looked at the Black Lives Matter demonstrations. They've looked at the defund the police thing, and they've realized that they can no longer use the community as a crutch to do their dirty work. So if you can't trust the community you're supposed to protect, what do? You create technologies that are going to be able to legitimize your ability to go into a neighborhood with guns blazed, that are going to enable you to criminalize entire neighborhoods and those things. So I think 5 years from now, we're going to be in a position of technology that we can't even recognize. And because the resources, because the knowledge, because the connections to understand those, I mean, I've been reading about it and been involved in some of those things, and my understanding is so limited that it's frightening. I think we're going to be in serious trouble.
Yeah.
And just for clarity, when you're referencing those technologies, are you talking about surveillance technology, or what are they actually doing?
Primarily surveillance technology, I think, is certainly at the front of the list. But weapons technology, right? You have dog robots that are running around and all types of things. And so technology ends up again, it ends up being a barrier to human. It's the opposite of humanity.
Yeah.
It's the opposite of humanity. And the more we take the human out of a very messed up force like the police that's already problematic, the more you take the human out of schools, the more you take the human out of this and replace it with technology that we've been sold is the solution to all
everything.
of our problems,
Yeah.
Goodness,
the less
yeah,
humanity
yeah.
we have. And whether it's
Yeah.
social media, whether it's, you
Yeah.
know, our cell phones, all of these types of things, I think, have helped disrupt the community. And so even that comes back to how can we actually build a healthy, striving community where we can all
Yeah.
push forward together.
Yeah, not to go down a rabbit hole on this, but I did say to my husband once that I think AI is like the next frontier around
really is.
criminalization. Yeah, but again, not to go down a rabbit hole on that, but let's bring it back.
Because I'll
to,
go down
yeah.
that rabbit hole.
Yeah, like we can all
I'll
go
be
there.
like
We-
Alice in Wonderland.
You don't want to open that up.
Yeah,
I think we can all go there.
We can go down that tangent for
Especially
real.
As
yeah.
paranoid as I am. Oh yeah. No.
So let's bring it back to a hopeful
Yeah.
note, okay?
Yeah.
When you close your eyes and when you think about the idea of thriving while Black, what images, what possibilities come to mind for you?
It's community. It's being able to live around the people who I work with, the people in my neighborhood, where you walk outside and you sitting on the porch and you see your neighbor. You don't have sugar. You go next door and ask the neighbor to do it. You have the grocery store within walking distance of your house that you can go, and you know the owner of the grocery store by name, and they know you, and your kids can be outside playing, and you know that the neighbors, if it's too late, will send them home, or if something's dangerous. That's really what I see as a
love
community that is thriving.
That is thriving.
Not necessarily attached to the material aspects of thriving, but through those bonds, through those relationships.
yeah.
If I have to go to work, I have somebody that's
you
going to
got-
watch my kids.
Yeah.
If I'm sick, I have somebody that's going to take me to the doctor, or I'll go next door and talk to the nurse, who all of those types of things. And so for me, again, having communities, Black communities where we live with one another and can support one another, is really what the future of thriving means for me.
Yeah, that's
man.
good. So tell me,
real
Khalid,
good.
before we wrap, our last question before we wrap, how are you paving a new way for Black folks to thrive?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm paving a way for Black folks to thrive.
Give yourself some credit.
Yeah, wait a minute now.
Yeah, hold up.
You're doing some amazing things. Of course you are.
I think I'm a part of an effort of multiple people and a part of a history
Yeah, of
that
course.
is always been built to help Black people thrive and help humanity, by default, help humanity thrive. I would hope that if people talk about my work after I'm gone or whatever, that they would be able to say that, one, it's important to understand that shit is complex. Two, we have to be able to avoid falling into the traps that are laid out from a system that doesn't want us to, an anti-liberation system, and be able to envision our own futures, envision what do I want my nonprofit, what do I want my organization, what do I want my family to look like, what are the values that lead me, instead of the values that we're being told to approach. And I think everybody's journey on that path is going to be a little bit different, but we've been so inundated with this is the right way, this is the wrong way, you're Democrat or Republican, you are abolitionist or a reformist, that that we've failed to envision the world outside of those things.
Those binaries. Yeah.
I'm an abolitionist, absolutely 100%. How can I envision a world and then move towards that world? And unfortunately, when you're worried about paying the rent, when you're worried about sending your kids to school, when you're worried about all of those things, it forces you back into this structure that makes it very difficult to be able to do all of those, that reimagining of the world that we want to go. So hopefully, people would look at some of the work that I'm doing or the work that we're doing at Pillars of the Community and say, hey, we don't have to fall into the stereotypical model of a nonprofit that funders have told us we need to do. Hey, I don't have to fight with you over grant money. I don't have I don't have to work with the DA in order to get a grant in order to help the people who were
Harmed by the DA.
by the DA in the first place.
It,
And so
that's it.
if there's anything, I think that's a humble, that I would hope that that's what people would look at the work that we're doing and be able to take away from it.
Well, I
And
think
that they
we
will.
can say job well done. You know,
Yes,
you are
job
well
well
on your
done.
way in that path. And
Yeah.
I think helping us all to your point, like imagine the world we want and set our values toward that vision. Thank you
that's
so much
wonderful.
for
Thank
being here
you.
today.
Thank you. I'm so
Before we
honored.
let you go, Felicia mentioned
Yeah.
that she heard you having some fun in meetings.
Oh yeah, you would always say something fun. So we do this thing just to get to know you a little bit more in a very fun way. We do something called rapid fire this or that, and sometimes it's not a this or that. It's just a tell us what it is. We're gonna start with favorite taco shop in San Diego or
This is the thing.
anywhere, right?
No, it's
Or
gonna be in San
It's-
Diego.
Of course, it's got to be San Diego. And I'm like,
There
you
is no
wouldn't-
favorite
you wouldn't-
taco
there's
shop
no
outside of
favorite
San
taco
Diego.
shop outside of San Diego.
Yeah, you didn't tell me this could be controversial.
Yeah,
Oh,
no,
oh,
this is
this
this is
is
a
this a
controversial hot
controversy?
topic.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
This is
Yeah,
yeah.
serious.
Yeah,
So
okay.
the first
Yeah,
thing I'll
introduce
say,
us to this
the
San Diego politics
Yeah.
around
the
tacos.
first thing I'll say, and hello, LA. It's not in LA.
Yes. Okay.
The second thing that I'll say is because I'm Muslim, I can't eat typical chicken
Yeah.
and those types of things. So I'm focusing on seafood
Oh,
or
okay.
mariscos.
Yeah.
And so there's a spot called Karina's in San Diego that I think is my go-to
Oh,
seafood
okay.
Okay.
Mexican.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
taco
Okay.
spot.
And the reason why it's controversial, real
Yeah,
quick, is
why?
because you go to different taco shops for different things. There is no singular taco shop that meets all
gets
of
you-
your needs.
That's right.
Oh,
You
Yeah.
get a California burrito in one place.
That's right. That's
As long
right.
as it's not LA, I'm just kidding, of course. I'm sure there's a
So
lot
he,
of
that's
great
a
taco
thing.
shops
so he
in
had
LA.
to
It's a
be specific
thing.
about the seafood. Yeah, that's a thing. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, now we know. I'm gonna do a taco
Now
tour.
you up on San
Yes,
Diego
I'm
game.
up on San
Okay.
Diego. Okay. Favorite thing to do in San Diego?
I like being able to find good coffee, drink good coffee, and read a book.
Oh, I love that. Okay, all right.
sounds
And then
lovely.
to that, best hidden gems in San Diego. Is that a coffee shop?
I would say Southeast San Diego is the best hidden gem.
Oh, really?
And that's just because the people, the environment, the community, even though a lot of the times people associate the community with negativity, there is actually a sense of pride of being from there. And so, yeah, I would say Southeast San Diego is a gem, which we don't necessarily want to share with everybody either. Talking about gentrification and all these types of things, we can't even afford to live there anymore. I know this is supposed to be rapid fire. I was
No, that's all. That's all right. We
talking
got
about
you. It's okay.
gentrification. So there and Chicano Park is definitely a place that people need to check out.
Chicano Park. Okay.
And then Balboa Park is
Balboa.
nice.
For
Okay,
sure.
Balboa Park.
Yeah.
Okay. And on the civic engagement side, if you had to pick phone banking, or which would you pick, phone banking or door knocking?
Door knocking.
Door knocking. Okay. Favorite dad moment?
Favorite dad moment?
Yeah.
Oh, my moment as a
Yeah,
dad?
your moment as
I
a
was about to
dad.
say, I don't have a lot of, okay.
Okay. Yeah, that's
My
okay.
moment as a
Yeah.
dad. My favorite dad moment was, there's a million dad
Yes, I'm
moments,
sure,
and I have
yeah.
3 sons, and so
Oh,
they have
wow.
all said absolutely amazing dad moments. But I think my favorite dad moment was overhearing a conversation that my oldest son was having at the time, and he maybe was 7 years old. Now he's like 24, with our next door neighbor. And in San Diego, we used to have the Blue Angels used to be stationed in Miramar. It's a big military base. And once a year, they would be zipping and zooming across the sky, and people would go to watch them at the things. And so the neighbor said, "Hey, we're going to go see the Blue Angels perform tomorrow. Do you want to come?" And my son said, no, we don't watch them because they kill people in other countries. We had just came back from Syria at the time of the Iraq War, and they knew that what we associate in San Diego is, oh, wow, that's cute, look at the plies and everything, that these were actually military killing machines. And to see my son be able to catch that at that time and make those connections, said, hey, you know what? We're going to be all right.
We're going to be all right.
That's beautiful.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, as long as you're in San Diego, I feel we're going to be all right. So thank you so much, Khalid, for being here today.
Yes.
Pillars of the community, organizing, community building while Black. Thank you so much for being on the show today. We appreciate having you here.
It's so nice to have you. Nice to get to know you.
Likewise.
Yes.
Likewise. Look forward to having you come visit in
Oh,
San
we will.
Diego.
Take me to the taco shop.
Let's do it. Let's do it.